the London Marathon, and you see one of the stations, for example, for 42,000 runners full of plastic, and you see our station full of nothing, it's when you start to see, oh, this is really making a difference. And I think that's one of the, I suppose, the visions and the main things that we are trying to do, and is when it started to make sense.
Welcome to the Business for Good podcast, a show where we spotlight companies making money by making the world a better place. I'm your host, Paul Shapiro, and if you share a passion for using commerce to solve many of the world's most pressing problems, then this is the show for you. Well, friends, welcome to episode 38 of Business for Good. I'm coming to you straight from Sacramento, California, the heart of the shelter-in-place movement. It is now April 2020, and to put it mildly, the world is a dramatically different place than it was 2 weeks ago when we dropped the episode 37 with Lisa Dyson from Air Protein. Not only is much of the world now on lockdown to try to slow the spread of the COVID-19 pandemic, but my own family life is much different, as my wife Tony and I were moved by a desperate plea from our local animal shelter, which was being shut down for pandemic purposes, to become an emergency foster home. Tony rushed to the shelter and ended up taking a nameless stray pit bull who has already shoved his very large head deep into our hearts. Eddie, who is named after my late grandfather, hasn't yet been converted from our foster dog to just our dog, but if you asked a magic 8-ball if this pandemic pup was going to become a permanent member of our pack, it would probably tell you that chances are high. I'll keep you posted on sweet little Eddie's journey. But before we get to this episode's interview, I just want to offer a brief thought on this pandemic that's disrupting our civilization so severely. Now, we all know this is not a natural disaster. It's a human-made disaster. Selling live wildlife of different species in crowded and stressful to the animals markets, it's like playing viral Russian roulette, and public health experts have been warning for years that this is a tragically risky practice. Thankfully, China has now banned such regrettable markets. But it's easy for those of us in the Western world to shake our heads at the live wildlife markets in China. It's easy, that is, because such a practice is so literally quite foreign to us. Perhaps what's more difficult is to be honest with ourselves about what kinds of pandemics we may be brewing through our own risky animal use practices. And while the new coronavirus, crippling as it is, might have a somewhat merciful case fatality rate of less than 1%, we know that this catastrophe may just be a dress rehearsal for an even more serious pandemic that could take a more gruesome toll, akin to the 1918 global flu pandemic, which originated in Kansas despite being named the Spanish flu, and killed at least 50 million people. When that day comes, it's very likely that such a virus will also have its origin in humanity's seemingly insatiable desire to eat animals, whether wild or domestic. The conditions in which we often farm animals today, we crowd tens of thousands of animals wing to wing or snout to snout, really serve as amplifiers for viral pandemics. A year ago, I published an op-ed in Canada's largest newspaper about how the factory farming of animals increases pandemic risk. And then again this past week, I wrote about this topic, why raising fewer animals for food will reduce the risk of the next pandemic, for Scientific American. You can get that article that I wrote for Scientific American in the show notes of this episode. I hope you'll share the story. We, of course, rightly lionize healthcare workers who are heroically working to mitigate the suffering and death caused by the pandemic. Well, we can each be heroes in our own right and try to reduce the risk of the next pandemic altogether. So yes, we should curb wildlife markets, but let's not stop there. If we have the will to shut down our entire society for weeks or maybe even months on end, surely we have the will to slightly change our diets. And thanks to many of the sustainable protein companies like those that we've featured on this podcast, that will be easier to do now than ever before. So now, on to this episode, which is also about changing our behavior. If you're listening to Business for Good, you likely don't need to be told how big the plastic pollution problem is. But what can we actually do about it? Well, 2 college students had an idea to make plastic packaging disappear. Rodrigo Garcia Gonzalez and Pierre Paslier were concerned about plastic bottles choking the ocean, and they thought they could develop a material that holds liquids that wouldn't leave such a negative footprint after its use. Their big idea? make soft packaging out of edible seaweed so you could essentially eat spheres of water rather than drink it from a hard plastic bottle. They began tinkering around in their kitchen, ordering ingredients from Amazon and Alibaba. With a rough prototype in hand, the two decided to launch a Kickstarter to see how much interest there'd be in their fledgling idea. Not knowing what to expect, Rodrigo and Pierre were blown away when in their Kickstarter, they raised about $1 million US. As a result, their company Notpla, which is short for not plastic and also not PLA, which is a type of so-called biodegradable plastic, was born. 7 years ago, they started this company, and today they've now raised $6 million, including, interestingly enough, from Rupert Murdoch's son. They have dozens of employees now. They supply plastic-free water spheres to runners and marathons. Then they're even working with food giants like Unilever on packaging for their small mayo packs that will be made from their biodegradable seaweed and more. It's quite a tale for these two entrepreneurs who, by the way, credit HBO's Silicon Valley as part of their education on how to raise money from venture capital funds and how to run a startup. So wherever you're listening, I hope you're at least 6 feet away from other humans and surviving this very uncharted era that we're now living through. May companies like Notpla succeed not only in their mission to reduce plastic pollution, but hopefully in inspiring others to invent technologies that leave a lighter footprint on the planet. As we're seeing, leaving such a lighter footprint wouldn't only be better for the non-human world, but also for all of humanity as well. I now bring you the co-founders of Notpla. Rodrigo and Pierre, welcome to the Business for Good podcast. Great to have you guys on.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, it's really cool. I've been reading about you guys actually for years, and I remember seeing some viral video about your pods that I think like runners in a race were getting, and it looked so cool. And I thought, geez, I would really like to try one of those myself as somebody who's into running and used to do a lot of races as well. But what sparks me to really want to get you guys on the show now is it looks like you guys are really making some real moves toward commercializing and raising some money. So first and foremost, congratulations on really moving forward with a company like that.
Thanks.
So tell me, you guys, what did it feel like for you? I mean, the story is that you guys were in school, right? And you had this idea. Tell me, like, how did you guys meet? Did you know each other before school? Like, what's the actual genesis of this company here?
Sure. Yeah. So we met in London. Pierre is from France, and he was working before in L'Oréal, making packaging. And I'm an architect by training, and we study both. This master course is called Innovation Design Engineering in 2 universities in London. It's basically a mix of design and engineering, and it's over 2 years. And there is where we met. We were working on different projects together, and this was one of them. And after we finished, we got a bit of support from Climate Kick, that is a European Union accelerator, and from there we decided to keep going with this project that originally thought to become a business.
Did you have an interest in the environment beforehand? Did you think like plastic was some problem that you wanted to tackle? Like, why this?
Yeah, I think that we definitely were, like many people, very frustrated by the fact that there's literally no alternatives. It's very hard to get the products that you want packaged in a different way than what's available on the shelf. And I think that without being kind of like super deeply involved in like many different societies or things related with the environment, we were certainly frustrated consumers. And I think from like a designer perspective, this was a bit of a challenge, a bit of an opportunity to think of something different.
But I think as well, we had been working a bit before with waste on different ways, separately, but before we know each other. But I was building, for example, architecture with plastic bottles and melting plastic bags to make some toys. And I suppose this interest from both of us, it came even earlier than this. So I think we are both quite conscious about how we consume and how we live in this planet.
So you were both interested in perhaps beforehand using plastic bottles as some, rather than throwing them away, it's using them as like building materials. And then you decided that you would try to create an alternative to plastic bottles in the first place. That's really what happened.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. Wow. So you're in school. You guys are now talking about what it would be like to create something that would be an alternative to plastic. How did you come to the idea of using something like seaweed to do this?
So yeah, we were starting basically with that brief of how we could package water, and we were looking on different natural materials or alternatives that had been doing this in one way or another. So we were testing different natural materials, different hydrogels, things like tapioca seeds, different hydrocolloids, and then we end up with this technique that was quite successful. That was using seaweed. That had been used for a while now on other industries. And we did a first proof of concept, a first prototype, and we were able to somehow push it out there and test it and iterate over it. And I think that was a bit the beginning.
Yeah, and it was very humble beginnings for us in terms of setup. We didn't really have access to a lab, so we were just prototyping things in our kitchens and ordering all sorts of weird and wonderful powders of the internet from Amazon and Alibaba. So it was very kind of like hands-on experimentation.
So, and you guys were still students at this point?
Yeah.
Wow. So you're experimenting in your own kitchens. Is it a sodium alginate? Is that what you're using?
Yeah, so it's one of the type of seaweed extracts that are available for other applications, and we ended up looking at lots of different ones, like things extracted from brown seaweed, like alginate, but also things coming from green seaweed or red seaweed, and trying to kind of like mix and match different extracts to create something that would be a little bit more like a packaging or like a fruit.
And even inside of sodium alginate, as you mentioned it, there is quite a lot of different, I suppose, variations that you can inside the whole world of sodium alginate. That there is quite a lot of different type of seaweeds that you can use to get sodium alginate or different type of molecular weight. So it's the whole, I suppose, it's a whole world in itself, one ingredient.
Interesting. So is it, when you say there are other applications, is sausage making one of these? Like when they're using like an alginate to coat a sausage with, is that one of the other applications that you would borrow this type of an idea from?
Actually, there's a lot of use of seaweed extract in so many industries around you. It's kind of crazy when you don't really know about it, but it's certainly used a lot in food, especially a lot in dairies. Like a lot of creams are actually like incorporating seaweed extracts as a thickener. It's used in cosmetics for a lot of different like lotions and different products. Used in pharmaceuticals and in lots of other ways. So it's kind of crazy when you realize that seaweed is actually already part of the kind of industrial landscape of everyday objects.
Huh. One use that I didn't know about it, I discovered a few years ago when we jumped into this project. For example, some seaweed material is used to make the pimento inside of the olives. And you know, there's these olives that have some pimento inside. Mm-hmm. Additionally, if you put just pimento, that will make the water around the olives really cloudy, and consumers won't buy the olives. So that's not actually pimento. That's kind of like a pimento, remade pimento using seaweed. So it's have a lot of different really weird applications.
How fascinating. So just tell us how the process works then, guys. Like, you have water. How do you get the water into this seaweed extract and cause it to stay in some type of a shape that, could then be consumed by somebody who doesn't want a plastic bottle?
Yeah, so basically we had to come up with both a like material formulation and a machine to create the packaging as you're referring to. And so we had to both use some of the properties of the seaweed extract to form this kind of jelly-like material, but also a machine that would be able to like do all of these operations all together. So what we're actually doing is, without revealing the secrets, is to actually kind of create the membrane around the water or the content that we are packaging all at once. And it's quite a special process that we had to kind of come up with and to then make a machine for. And it's quite interesting because it's a very efficient process in terms of energy consumption. It's all happening at room temperature, so there's no heating like on plastic, and it can be quite compact. So the idea for our machines is to be rather small than large, so that we can actually produce relatively locally. So the idea is that the material has a really short shelf life, so it can't really handle a very long supply chain. But on the other hand, it biodegrades very quickly. And so by having this material combined with this local manufacturing technology, we're able to produce and deliver the solution very quickly while minimizing the impact on the environment.
So what I had read about what you guys are doing is that you're taking the casing and basically enveloping the water and then freezing that water. But you're saying it's at room temperature. So is there a freezing process for this or no?
So we started really early on the first steps was using some freezing. We realized almost in the first year that freezing was not a way to go because it's not somehow an industrial process. Doesn't make sense to freeze water to be able to coat it. But it was one of the early things and one of the things as well that we share with an open community, if that makes sense, how to do it. But we understood that if we wanted to jump this to industrial process, the process should not involve freezing. And the current process that we have doesn't involve freezing at all.
Okay. That's certainly an interesting pivot. So you had mentioned that these have a short shelf life and that they're biodegradable. So the product is perishable. So two questions about it. One, how long can it last? Does it need to be refrigerated? How long can it last before it's no good? And then also, how do you prevent hygienic problems? If there's a hygiene problem on the outside of a plastic bottle, it's no big deal because you're not going to presumably be licking the outside of the bottle. But with these, of course, you're going to, perhaps put the whole thing in your mouth. So, how long can it last? Does it need to be refrigerated? And how do you keep it hygienic?
I can answer first question. It lasts. It really depends on the content that you have inside. So I think the shortest shelf life that we have is with fresh orange juice, that it only lasts a few days. And then we have things like water or other contents that they last probably on the range of a couple of weeks or a bit more. And we have things like ketchup or sauces that it lasts around a month. And then we have dry products that we can potentially package as well, dry products that if you don't have really high humidity, it can last, not forever, but can last quite a lot if you don't have humidity and bacteria around it. So it really depends on it's like a fruit. We always try to find that analogy. It depends on the content and the water content on the content and the bacteria of the content and the oxidation of the content, what it will relate quite a lot in terms of shelf life. In terms of hygiene, it's really similar as what we always refer to fruits. So basically what we're trying to do is more similar to fruits in all the different aspects than what is to plastic, in terms of how you consume it as well. So it really depends as well on the application. In some cases, the product doesn't need to be eaten. Like, for example, we do a lot of things with sauces, like ketchup, mayonnaise for takeaway deliveries. In that case, the consumer just stir it and use it and discard it, doesn't consume a membrane full of ketchup, if that makes sense. In other cases, for example, when we do things in marathons or running events, the product either gets, we call it nip and sip, so the product kind of like the consumer tears a corner and drink from it, really similar to what you do from a can or from a plastic cup, if that makes sense. And in other cases, yes, it's a sampling product where consumers is a size of a sip, and in that case, the consumers will eat it all. In that cases, we make sure it's handled as if it was a food product, so the same way they will handle any kind of fruit or any kind of pastry, etc. And depending as well on the application, we don't normally do it, but we can do put a double layer, which that means is that you can peel off the product.
Oh, interesting. So you could peel it and then discard some external portion of it that would also be algae.
Yeah. So if you imagine, for example, an orange or a mandarin, you have small segments inside of a bigger membrane. So groupings is something that we can do as well. and it doesn't need to be alginate. It could be any other material. So at the moment, I think we have over 75 different formulations of materials.
Wow.
Most of them with hydrocolloid, but not all of them with alginate. Some of them, yes. But as well as I mentioned, kind of like each of the specific ingredients is a whole world. And we have been working quite a lot on the different extraction process and to try to specify as well what material works best. Because we believe there's no one material for everything. It's a bit like, again, fruits. There's different skins of fruits for depending what kind of fruit you are consuming. So it's a bit what we are trying to do almost a specific product or specific membrane or specific film or packaging for specific content that match the life of the content. So coming back to the first question, we try to match the shelf life of the content with the shelf life of the packaging. That I think is the most problematic thing of the packaging nowadays, where you consume something that is not going to last probably maybe more than a few weeks, and you consume it within a few minutes, and then the packaging is going to be there for hundreds of years. So I think that's the main issue in terms of mismatch of shelf life of the product and shelf life of the packaging.
Yeah, I think about that often. Sometimes, like if I, when I'm, for example, offered a plastic cup of some beverage, and how I'm going to drink it, and it'll take me less than 1 minute to drink, but it will be around for millennia. It'll be around, and we'll probably, it might. Who knows? Maybe it'll even outlive our own civilization. And it just seems like such a crazy thing to do. Like plastic is such a great material because it's so functional, but at the same time, it's just so detrimental. So finding alternatives to it, and then also finding ways to actually use and maybe even degrade the current plastic that we have out there seems really imperative. So let's talk, guys, about your company. We've talked a little bit about how you're doing it, but about how you're making the products. But in terms of the actual mechanics of a company, when you guys were students, I don't know whether you were thinking this was going to become your career, but you did some crowdfunding. And tell me about that. How did it go? And what did you tell people?
Yeah, so I think that we did crowdfunding out of lack of other options, which is quite funny because at that point, we were pitching a lot of angels, a lot of traditional investors, and no one really wanted to be kind of like the first to back us. There was a lot of kind of question marks around whether or not this was a little bit too crazy. And so after quite a few months of unsuccessful kind of like pitching, we considered crowdfunding as one of those kind of like slightly new and maybe a little bit risky ways of funding our business. I think that what happened to us was really like incredible. We didn't expect to have such a big wave of support, but basically within like the first 3 days, we fundraised the whole campaign. We doubled our target, and we received £850,000 from 900 investors all around the world. And at the back of that, we had quite a lot of media awareness. We had some videos on social media that got 100 million views. It was just a little bit crazy for a small team working from Starbucks or from our living room. So it was really kind of like unprecedented in terms of attention that we received, and I think that it was super exciting to see that maybe traditional investors were not so keen to back us, but like normal people from the internet were really keen to be part of the story and to kind of like see more of those alternatives reaching market.
Why do you think it is that people were so enthusiastic about it and that you were able to raise so much from so many people? I mean, you guys are 2 college students. You have this idea. It seems like a cool idea, but lots of people do crowdfunding. They don't have nearly that much success. So what do you think it is that helped you guys to break out like that?
I think to me, it was the product itself. It tells a story and it sparks a lot of imagination. And I suppose there's a lot of, a wave against plastic nowadays, but like, there's not too many solutions out there. And I think something that is that crystal clear that like you can eat the packaging itself, so it's not plastic anymore. I think it's already giving a quite positive signal to the people, and I think people engage on it really straightforward and really in an honest way.
Wow. So that's how you guys got started with this crowdfunding, but I know that more recently you've had a much larger round. So tell us what you have done recently on the fundraising side and where you guys are at on your path to commercialization.
Sure. So we got, following the crowdfunding round, we were able as well to be backed up by Sky Ocean Rescue. That is a fund by Sky, the media company, that it focuses on backing up alternative solutions for fighting the plastic problem. So we were their first investment. Later on this Christmas as well, we closed another round of investment with more, let's put it out there, I don't know how to say it, more traditional investors, which as well probably is going to help us towards the development of our business quite a lot for the next couple of years. And in terms of commercialization, what we are at the moment working on is on Ojo, our main product, the first product that managed to package liquid. At the moment, we have 3 verticals. So we do a lot of running events, and we would like to keep doing those. And at the moment, mostly we are focusing in UK because the way that we operate, but we expect to do more and more events outside and start to look on how to expand. We do a lot of things with sauces and as well to do that, but in a much bigger scale with partners like Just Eat and Unilever.
For people who are listening in the United States, they may not know what Just Eat is. So tell us, what is Just Eat and what are you guys doing with them?
So Just Eat is like takeaway food platform, a bit like Delivery Hero or Uber Eats, and they are one of the largest in Europe, and they know that like ordering a takeaway delivered to your home might not be the most kind of like sustainable option at the moment. A lot of like deliveries come with quite a lot of plastic, cutlery, bags, and in our case, like the sauce sachets. And so from quite early on, they've been really big supporters of what we do, giving us basically a platform to test, giving us access to their restaurants, and really enabling us to try and improve our solution. So basically, we've been doing quite a few kind of like trials, always kind of like growing in terms of scale and complexity to provide plastic-free sauce sachets to their consumers. And most recently, we teamed up with a sauce manufacturer. So in that case, it was Hellmann's from the Unilever group to basically work on this together, a sauce manufacturer, a sustainable packaging company, and a takeaway platform.
And just to take it from there and just give you the full picture of the company and the portfolio of products, we have 2 other products. One is a coating. So basically, we use all our learnings that we have in terms of membranes to make paper grease-proof and waterproof for different applications. And recently, we have been trialing our first box together with, again, Just Eat, this delivery platform, with restaurants. Instead of delivering food in plastic boxes, they deliver it in paper boxes lined with Notpla. That is our material. And the third line of products that we have been trying as well, it's films, basically heat-sealable films that can substitute any kind of flexible package to contain different products from solids or food products or hardware to semi-liquids as well.
So how many people are working at the company now?
So currently we are 25,
wow.
And we have chemists and engineers, designers, a commercial team, and a production team.
And we expect this year to grow significantly as well in terms of.
How much total money, including the crowdfunding, have you guys raised?
The latest round was 4 million, and before that we raised about 2.2 million, so that's 0.2.
If you had gone back, to the starting of your company, let's say 7 years ago, you guys are in school and you could have looked forward and thought that you guys would have dozens of people working there. You raise millions of dollars. What would you have thought?
Well, I think that it's certainly like a little bit of a crazy adventure. We're super happy to to see that it's progressing and that we can finally start to have some impact. I think that what really drives us is to finally kind of like start putting a dent on this plastic problem. And it's super exciting to see that now we have a team of people who are also sharing this kind of like common purpose of really trying to do something about this problem. So it's super exciting to be at the forefront of what's possible to do in terms of challenging traditional packaging and seeing that we actually are seeing a lot of traction in the market for this.
And I will add to that we feel, at least I feel incredible gratefulness for all these people who joined the team and are pushing super hard to make this change.
What's your ambition? Like, what do you hope to achieve with the company?
I think that there is such a disruption in the market of packaging that we kind of see ourselves as potentially becoming the Tetra Pak of sustainable packaging, becoming this kind of like leading company that really give you the certainty that when you use this packaging, you're not having a negative impact on the environment. And I think that hopefully we can grow our catalog of solutions so that we can have many, many different kind of like solutions that correspond to different applications and make single-use packaging a thing of the past.
Yeah, we normally say we try to make plastic packaging disappear. And to a certain extent, I think, for example, when we did last year, and we're going to do it this year again, the London Marathon, and you see one of the stations, for example, for 42,000 runners full of plastic, and you see our station full of nothing, it's when you start to see, oh, this is really making a difference. And I think that's one of the, I suppose, the visions and the main things that we are trying to do, and is when it started to make sense.
For sure. So tell me then, like if you think about that marathon, Rodrigo, the plastic cups, I don't know how much they cost for the other stations. I'm sure that they're a very small cost. What's the cost of your product compared to those?
It depends how you see the cost, because, for example, races, normally they get paid to have products. So they don't pay for products. They get products sponsor. So it's quite hard for us to compete against that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I guess it'd be hard to compete against them getting paid to do it. But
Exactly.
But let's say take like you're working with Hellmann's Mayo. Then if you are gonna think about what the packet of Hellmann's Mayo costs, the actual packet, what is the cost for you guys to make that little packet?
But coming back as well to the example of the marathons, if, for example, they get that for free, but then they have to pay quite a lot for disposal. So they pay, it's quite considerable. It depends on the race, so I wouldn't say a number, but like they pay much, much more than what you expect per runner, per cleaning, than what you will expect them to pay for water. So that's a really interesting angle that helped us convince quite a lot of race organizers to adopt our solution.
Nice.
So it's not just the price of buying the product, but like the full circular system. And regarding price of the product, it really depends what we are doing and which kind of numbers we are doing. It reflects at the moment, for example, on the sauces, we are slightly premium, depending on which kind of package you compare it to. But if you compare it to the really cheap single sachet, it's not like the premium that I suppose is semi-rigid. We are a bit more expensive than that. We are conscious of that, and I think it's part of our journey. It's not something that we are super focused at the moment in terms of reducing prices, but as well, we are not too far off.
Okay.
One way to think about it that is quite interesting is that essentially the raw material, seaweed, is very renewable. It grows very fast. Some of the seaweed we've used grows up to 1 meter per day.
Wow.
So that's really crazy. And we are using the extracts, which is a bit what flour is to corn or something like this. So the material has really the potential to be quite cost competitive. At the moment, what we don't have is scale and super kind of like large fleets of machines and tens of years of optimization. So obviously, we're not competing with plastic, which has basically 70 years of free R&D from around the world. But when you look at the basics, Seaweed really has the potential to provide this when we get there. And I think that's the really kind of like comforting thought about like the whole world kind of switching their plastic habits to natural materials, is that it can really stack up.
Okay. So speaking of corn, a lot of the plastic alternatives, so to speak, right now are made out of corn. It's like this corn-based plastic called PLA. And so why is what you're doing better than that?
Yeah. So thanks for bringing it up. That's a classic kind of like misunderstanding of like biodegradable packaging in a way. PLA is a plastic. It originates from like cornstarch, but it's definitely a plastic in its chemical composition, whereas our material is a polysaccharide, so it's just not plastic. And when you look at PLA, one of the good things is that it doesn't come from oil. But if you look at the end of life, basically to be able to biodegrade such material, you have to collect it, sort it out from the rest of the trash, and put it in an industrial composter, which is basically a very specific facility that heats up at very specific conditions the material. And then when you're at like temperatures above 70 degrees, it will start biodegrading. But those conditions don't happen anywhere on the planet naturally. So it means that if this material doesn't end up in an industrial composter, it will stay in the ocean or in landfill for the same millennia that we were talking about earlier. And on top of that, one of the issue with a lot of new kind of like bioplastics is that they are very similar looking and they behave very similar than a lot of traditional plastics like PET. And so even if a very small portion of PLA ends up on a PET recycling scheme, it will have a great deal of impact on that whole kind of like batch. And so as little as 1% could completely destroy the properties of a batch of recycled PET. So for the recycling scheme, it's a very big headache to be able to kind of like sort out PLA from PET in their input material, because they're virtually similar looking and there's no easy way to sort them out.
Yeah, we had Tom Szaky from TerraCycle on an earlier episode of this podcast, and he really railed against these what he called so-called biodegradable plastics that said, just like you're saying, they're really not biodegradable for the most part, and that it's just focusing on either reusing plastic or creating truly biodegradable plastic would be a better bet for sure. And that's part of the play on the POA term in your name, right? Not plus, or not only not plastic, but also not POA.
You got it.
Yeah, nice. So, Rodrigo and Pierre, it's very rare, at least that I see companies that have two co-CEOs. I know that you guys are co-founders, but you're also co-CEOs. So how does that work out for you? Like, how do you differentiate in decision-making? What happens when you guys have a disagreement? Like, how does that work to have co-CEOs?
Yeah, I think that in a way, I agree that it's rare because in a way, the traditional kind of like investors don't like to see this around for too long. But because of our funding history and because of our kind of like initial crowdfunding, we got a chance to kind of like prove that this was working for Notpla, and that was the best way for Notpla to grow for a while. And now we have that track record to show that this is something that is really working and valuable for the company. So we're quite grateful for that kind of like that period of having the chance to prove ourselves. I think that we have a very kind of like good synchronization in the way we think. And I think that if we hadn't like connected that way, it would have been really hard to launch this company altogether. And I think that it really is like something that is kind of like fundamental and quite rare. We have a very collegial approach to how we like do decision making in the company as well, and that means not just between the two of us, but we also really involve the rest of the team to make sure that we are making choices that everyone can contribute to, and that everyone is feeling like they are a part of. And I think that it's really a process that is very helpful to sometimes having to formalize what you think to explain why we should do it one way or another. There's a great deal of respect in the way we do that, but there's also like something really helpful about having something not sitting just in one brain alone, but having to kind of like jump from one to the other and having to be explained. So I think that, yeah, we've really kind of like started to master this relationship and make it work for Notpla.
All right. So moving down to the end of our interview here, guys, you have led quite an impressive journey so far, going from students coming up with an idea to help solve the plastic problem to raising millions of dollars and now running a company with dozens of employees. I presume you guys are still in your 20s. Is that correct?
30s.
30s. Okay. Welcome to your 30s. I just left my 30s. So, you guys are of course still young, but you've had a lot of success so far, a lot of success that many people would really admire. And so,
the students as well.
Okay.
I wasn't studying until my 30s.
Were there any resources that were useful for you guys? Were there any, people, mentors, books, speeches, anything that was actually helpful for you guys on this path that you would recommend to others who want to try to replicate some of the success that you've had?
Actually, put it that way. I didn't thought about it like that, but I think university itself is a great resource. If you consider it as a safe space or a safe time that you have to make mistakes and not have too much of a pressure to fail. And I think that has been one of the, I suppose, main successes that we have collectively share, I suppose. And I think we're still, both of us, quite linked with academia in a way. So I keep an involvement with different universities, teaching design, and Pierre as well, links on different workshops, etc. So I think it's one of the greatest, I suppose, places in society to come up with ideas and to be able to share in a safest place with colleagues and professors and researchers, and I think I love that.
And maybe in a slightly less serious way, but I remember like when we started watching Silicon Valley, the show. It's kind of like, in a very ironical way, but it's kind of like teaching you business 101 in a fun kind of like 20 minutes episode way. And that when we started, we were in the incubator of Climate Kick. There was a lot we got from the mentors and from the workshops, but just like from like that show, we learned quite a few tricks. So it's there's a lot of truth in the jokes and everything.
That's so funny. I've only watched, I think, a few episodes of it. I was on a plane one time and I was watching it, and I can assure you that I felt exactly as you did. I thought, there's a lot more truth in this than one might think, for sure. That's pretty funny. Okay, so also, guys, I wanted to ask you before we go here, then, you're focused on the plastic problem. Presumably there are lots of other ways to make the world a better place, maybe even including other companies to focus on the plastic problem. But if you're not going to do something else, you're going to focus on this. Are there any other business ideas to do good in the world that you hope somebody else will take up the banner with and will run with?
Yeah, sure. For me, I will say, I was working before this project, and it was one of the beginnings of this project on making artificial clouds. So looking at the system of water and how nature delivers water and how we could potentially make fresh water. So I think it's something that I'm quite passionate about, and I would love to jump up more into that.
That's interesting. So making artificial clouds for water harvesting, like for fresh water harvesting, or for reflecting sunlight back into space to prevent global warming?
No, to water harvesting and transportation.
Huh, interesting. So you would basically create clouds that would be fresh water, obviously, and then you could harvest them and utilize them. That's a really interesting idea. I look forward to learning more about that.
Yeah, but basically it's that, like try to copy how nature transport water, that is not through pipes,
yeah.
How nature gets water, that is through the sea and through using the sun,
okay.
And try to use those same systems to create something similar to a cloud that could potentially deliver fresh water on those places where it's needed, using the resources that nature gave us.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a great idea. I hope that there will be some future entrepreneur on this show who comes back on the show talking about her or his water harvesting cloud creation startup that they're doing because they were inspired by what you were saying there, Rodrigo. So hopefully that'll happen. I'll look forward to it. But I really appreciate what you guys are doing. And of course, I'll be rooting for your success. So thanks so much. And I can't wait for Notpla to come to the United States. And I'll look forward to getting some packet of ketchup sometime with it and get a chance to squirt that on my food.
Cool. Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for listening. We hope you found use in this episode. If so, don't keep it to yourself. Please leave us a 5-star rating on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. And as always, we hope you will be in the business of doing good.